For almost a year, I thought I was losing my mind. I would wake up in the morning with strange, faint bruises on my arms and legs, with a deep, aching soreness in my bones that had no cause, and with a profound sense of unease that clung to me all day like a damp shroud. I went to doctors who told me I was just getting old. But my husband, my quiet, watchful husband of 50 years, he didn't believe it. He saw the terror in my eyes that I couldn't even name myself. And so one night, he told me he was going on a fishing trip with his brother, but instead, he parked his truck down the street, and he sat in the dark, and he watched our house. And in the dead of night, he saw our son, our only child, our beloved Mark, use his key to let himself into our home and creep into my bedroom while I slept. My husband sat in that truck until dawn, paralyzed by a rage so pure and so absolute it almost stopped his heart. And the next day he confronted our son, and he delivered a father's justice that was more terrible and more complete than anything the law ever could. Hi everyone. I'm Grandma Helen. I am 74 years old. I live with my husband George in a small town in Colorado. We moved here 3 years ago, after the events of this story. We sold the house we had lived in for 45 years, the house where we raised our son. We had to. The memories were poison. The walls themselves seemed to scream. This story. This is the great horror of my life. A horror so unthinkable, so fundamentally unnatural, that for a long time my mind simply refused to accept it. It is one thing to be harmed by a stranger, or even an enemy. But to be harmed by your own child, the baby you held in your arms, the boy whose scraped knees you bandaged, whose fevers you nursed, it is a betrayal that fractures the very foundation of your world. It breaks reality. I have never spoken of this to anyone. Not my friends. Not my sister. Our new neighbors think we are a quiet, retired couple who moved here for the mountain air. They do not know we are refugees, fleeing the ruins of our own family. But the silence has become a sickness. And I have learned that the only antidote to a secret like this is to speak it, to drag it out into the light. Before I do, I would ask for your quiet support. If you could please take a moment to press that like button and subscribe to my channel. It is a small act of solidarity. It tells me that you are willing to sit with me in this difficult memory, and that you believe that even the most terrible stories deserve to be told, if only so that the survivors know they are not alone. Thank you. To understand the nightmare, you must first understand the dream we were living. My life, for 50 years, was a quiet, happy, and profoundly normal one. I married my husband, George, when I was 20. He was and is my rock. A man of few words, but of deep integrity and a quiet, observant strength. He was a master electrician, a man whose hands understood the complex, invisible currents that powered our world. He was logical, patient, and steady. He was my safe harbor. We had one child, our son, Mark. He was a good baby, an easy child. He was the center of our universe. We poured all our love, all our hopes, into him. We lived in a modest but comfortable home, in a nice suburb, the kind of place with big trees and friendly neighbors. We had a good life, a simple life. We were happy. Mark grew up, went to college, and met a woman named Olivia. She was a nice girl, a bit high-strung perhaps, but she seemed to make him happy. They got married, and for a few years, everything was normal. They lived about an hour away, and we would see them for holidays, for Sunday dinners. It was the life we had always imagined. The first crack in our perfect world appeared when Mark was around 30. He lost his job. He had been working in a stable but unexciting accounting firm, and they had a round of downsizing. It hit him hard. His confidence, which had never been particularly robust, shattered. He was unemployed for almost 6 months. Olivia, who was working as a teacher's aide, was supporting them, and the financial strain began to wear on their marriage. They were fighting constantly. Mark fell into a deep, dark depression. He became sullen, resentful, and he started to drink more than he should. It was George's idea for them to move in with us. "Helen," he said to me one evening, his face etched with worry for our son. They're drowning. They're going to lose their apartment. Their marriage is falling apart. We have the space. Let them move in here for a while. A year, maybe 2. They can get back on their feet, save some money, get Mark back to being himself. It's the right thing to do. He's our son. It's the right thing to do. He's our son. I agreed, of course. How could I not? My heart ached for my boy. I wanted to fix him, to soothe his pain, to make his world right again, just as I had when he was a little boy. So they moved in. They took over our large, finished basement, which had its own bathroom and a small kitchenette area. We thought we were providing a safety net. We had no idea we were inviting a monster into our home. The first year was difficult, but in a way that felt normal. There was the inherent tension of 4 adults, living in a space designed for 2. Mark was moody and withdrawn. He found a new job, but it was a step down from his old one, and his resentment simmered just beneath the surface. Olivia was stressed, trying to hold everything together. George and I tried to be a quiet, supportive presence. We gave them their space. We tried not to interfere. The strange, inexplicable things began about a year after they moved in. It started with a feeling. A deep, profound sense of unease that would settle on me for no reason. I would be having a perfectly normal day, and then a wave of anxiety, a feeling of being watched or unsafe, would wash over me. I dismissed it as just stress, the worry of having them in the house. Then came the physical symptoms. I started waking up in the morning feeling exhausted, as if I hadn't slept at all. My body ached in a way it never had before. A deep, muscular soreness, as if I had been running a marathon in my sleep. And then, the bruises. They were faint at first. A small purplish mark on my upper arm. A cluster of what looked like finger marks on my thigh. I would see them in the shower and be completely bewildered. Where did that come from? I couldn't remember bumping into anything. I would ask George, "Did you see how I got this bruise?" He would look at it, his brow furrowed with concern. "No, honey, I've got no idea." I went to my doctor. He ran some blood tests. "Helen," he said, his tone kind but dismissive. "Everything looks normal. You're 72. As we age, our skin becomes thinner. We bruise more easily. You probably just bump into things and don't even realize it." I felt foolish, like a hypochondriac. So I tried to ignore it. But it got worse. The bruises became more frequent, more pronounced. Sometimes I would wake up with a dull, throbbing headache, and the feeling of unease intensified. It began to center around my own bedroom. At night, I started having trouble sleeping. I would lie awake for hours, my heart pounding, listening to every creak of the house. I started having nightmares, strange, suffocating dreams that I could never remember upon waking, but that left me with a feeling of absolute terror. My inner world became a terrifying place of confusion and self-doubt. Was I going crazy? Was this the beginning of dementia? I became forgetful, distracted. I would lose my train of thought, mid-sentence. I would walk into a room and forget why I was there. The world began to feel unreal, as if I were living behind a pane of thick, distorted glass. I was terrified. I thought my mind was breaking down. George watched all of this with a growing silent concern. He is not a man of many words, but he is the most observant person I have ever known. He noticed everything. He noticed the way I would flinch if someone came up behind me too quickly. He noticed the dark circles under my eyes. He noticed that I had stopped singing to myself in the kitchen. He started asking quiet questions. "Helen, did you sleep well last night? Honey, are you feeling all right today? You seem on edge." He would try to reassure me. "It's okay. We'll figure this out. You're not going crazy." But I could see the worry in his eyes. He knew something was deeply wrong, but like me, he had no frame of reference for what it could possibly be. The interactions with my son during this time were strange and unsettling, though I didn't recognize them for what they were. He was often overly solicitous. "Are you okay, Mom? You look tired. Can I get you anything?" His concern always felt off. It didn't feel genuine. It felt like the concern of someone checking on a project, not a person. There was a watchfulness in his eyes when he looked at me, a strange, clinical curiosity that made my skin crawl. I would sometimes catch him, just staring at me from across the room, and when our eyes met, he would quickly look away. One afternoon, I was napping on the sofa in the living room. I woke with a jolt, my heart hammering. I had the distinct, undeniable feeling that someone had been standing over me. The air in the room felt disturbed. Mark was standing by the kitchen doorway. "Oh, sorry, Mom," he said quickly, a strange, flustered look on his face. "I didn't mean to wake you. I was just getting a glass of water." But the feeling lingered. A deep, primal sense of violation. The turning point for George, the moment his quiet concern transformed into active suspicion, came after a particularly bad night. I had woken up screaming from a nightmare I couldn't remember. I was drenched in sweat, my heart racing. And the next morning, I had a long, ugly bruise down the side of my ribs that was so sore I could barely breathe. I broke down completely. I sat at the kitchen table and sobbed, my head in my hands. "George, I'm losing my mind," I wept. "I don't know what's happening to me. I'm so scared." George knelt beside me. He didn't say much. He just held my hand. But I saw something new in his eyes that day. His worry had hardened into something else. Something cold and focused. He was no longer just a concerned husband. He was a man on a mission. He was going to find out what was hurting his wife. His first thought was the logical one. He suspected I was sleepwalking, perhaps violently, and injuring myself. So, he began to stay up late, sitting in the dark of the living room, watching the hallway to our bedroom. He did this for a week. He saw nothing. I didn't leave the room. His next thought was more disturbing. He began to wonder about me, about my mental state. Was I somehow hurting myself in my sleep, unconsciously? Was the doctor right? Was this just a bizarre, terrifying symptom of aging? But he couldn't shake the feeling that something external was happening. The bruises didn't always look like bumps and falls. They looked intentional. The feeling of unease in our own home was a palpable thing. It was a puzzle, and my husband, the master electrician, who could trace a single faulty wire through a maze of circuits, was determined to solve it. And the only variable, the only thing that had changed in our lives before this all began, was the presence of our son. The moment of truth, the moment the unthinkable became the undeniable, was born of my husband's quiet, methodical mind. He couldn't accept that there was no explanation. He decided he needed to see what was happening in my bedroom when he wasn't there. He bought a small camera, a tiny, motion-activated nanny cam, the kind people use to watch their babysitters. It was no bigger than a sugar cube. He didn't tell me. He didn't want to frighten me more, or make me feel like I was under surveillance. He was protecting me, even from his own investigation. One evening, he told me that his brother, who lived about an hour away, had called and needed his help with a major electrical issue at his farmhouse. He said he would have to go that night and would probably stay over. It was a plausible lie. He kissed me goodbye, told me to lock the doors, and left. But he didn't go to his brother's house. He parked his truck on a side street, 2 blocks away, in a spot where he had a clear view of our front door. And he waited. Before he had left, he had hidden the tiny camera on the bookshelf in our bedroom, tucked between 2 old photo albums, with a perfect, unobstructed view of my bed. He sat in the cold, dark cab of his truck for hours. The neighborhood fell silent. The lights in our house went out. He watched, his heart a cold, heavy knot in his chest. He told me later that he was praying he would see nothing. He was praying that he was wrong, that he was the one who was going crazy. Around 2 in the morning, he saw it. A flicker of movement at the front of the house. He saw our son, Mark, slip out of the side door from the basement. But he didn't get in his car. He crept around to the front door of the main house. And George watched, his blood turning to ice as Mark used his key, the key we had given him for emergencies, to let himself into our home. George sat there, paralyzed, his mind screaming. What was he doing? Was there a gas leak? Was there some other emergency? He was about to get out of his truck when he stopped. He remembered the camera. He needed to know. He needed to see. He waited for what he said felt like a lifetime. 20 minutes later, the front door opened again, and our son slipped out, closing the door silently behind him, and disappeared back into the basement. George did not move. He sat in that truck until the first, gray light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. He told me he was consumed by a rage so profound, so absolute, that he was afraid to move. He was afraid that if he went into that house, he would commit a crime from which there was no coming back. His entire world, his entire understanding of his life, his family, his own son, had been detonated. When the sun was fully up, he drove home. He walked into the house. I was already in the kitchen, making coffee, feeling the familiar, dreadful exhaustion and the dull ache in my limbs. He didn't say a word. He just walked past me, into our bedroom. He retrieved the tiny camera from the bookshelf. He took the small memory card out and inserted it into his laptop on the kitchen table. "George, what is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You're scaring me. Sit down, Helen," he said. His voice was a sound I had never heard before. It was flat. It was dead. It was terrifying. He turned the laptop screen towards me and pressed play. The video was grainy, shot in the black and white of infrared night vision. But it was perfectly clear. I saw myself, asleep in our bed. And then, I saw the bedroom door open silently. I saw my son, our son, Mark, creep into the room. And I watched in absolute, soul-shattering horror as he approached my bed. I watched as he put his hand over my mouth. I watched as he did the unthinkable, the unspeakable. I watched him violate his own mother, my body thrashing weakly in a drugged, unconscious sleep. I understood everything in that moment. The bruises, the exhaustion, the nightmares, the feeling of being unsafe in my own home. It wasn't my mind that was breaking. It was my son. He had been drugging me, putting something in my nightly cup of tea, just enough to keep me in a deep, unresponsive sleep. I don't remember screaming. But George told me later that the sound I made was not human. It was the sound of a soul being ripped in two. The world dissolved into a black, roaring void. The awakening for me was a descent into a new kind of hell. The hell of knowing. But for George, it was a call to action. His grief and horror were immediately channeled into a cold, focused and righteous fury. While I was falling apart, he was building a fortress. His plan was not about the police. Not at first. What would we tell them? What proof did we have beyond a grainy video that would be dissected and disputed by lawyers? How could I, a 72-year-old woman, endure the shame and humiliation of a public trial? How could we live with the knowledge that we had sent our own son to prison? No. Oh. George understood that this was a crime for which the legal system had no adequate punishment. This required a different kind of justice. A father's justice. He waited 2 days. 2 days in which he and I barely spoke. We moved like ghosts in our own home, the air thick with the unspeakable knowledge that lay between us. He was waiting for Olivia to be out of the house. When she finally left for a parent-teacher conference, George went downstairs. He told me to stay in the kitchen. I heard his footsteps on the basement stairs. I heard the door close. And then, I heard the sound of my husband's voice, low and terrible. I could not make out the words. And then I heard my son's voice, a high, panicked cry. Then, for a long time, there was silence. An hour later, George came back up the stairs. His face was pale. His hands were steady. He looked at me. "It's done," he said. He had confronted Mark. He had shown him the video. He had watched our son completely and utterly fall apart, collapsing into a sobbing, pathetic heap on the floor. He had confessed everything. He said he didn't know why he did it. He spoke of his anger, his resentment at his own failures, his jealousy of our stable life. They were the pathetic, whining excuses of a monster. George gave him his terms. They were not negotiable. He and Olivia were to pack 1 suitcase each. They were to leave that day. They would be given $5,000 in cash, enough to disappear. They were to never, ever contact us again. If they ever did, if they ever came near us, if I ever had to see his face again, George would release the video. He would send it not just to the police, but to Olivia, to her parents, to everyone they had ever known. He would salt the earth of their entire lives. My son, my broken, monstrous son, agreed to everything. He was terrified, not of what he had done, but of being caught. I watched from the kitchen window as they left. They didn't even look at the house. They got in their car and drove away. And I have never seen or heard from him since. The aftermath was a long, slow, and agonizing process of healing. The silence in our house was different now. It was no longer the silence of denial. It was the silence of truth. It was heavy, but it was clean. The first thing we did was change the locks. The second thing we did was pack up every single thing in the basement that belonged to them. We donated it all to charity. We wanted no trace of them left in our home. Their disappearance was a quiet mystery in our community. George and I told a simple, sad story. We said that Mark and Olivia's marriage had finally broken down, and that they had decided to go their separate ways and start new lives elsewhere. It was a plausible lie, a kind fiction to cover an unthinkable truth. We sold the house a year later. We couldn't stay there. Every corner held a memory. Every shadow seemed to hold his shape. We sold the house we had loved for 45 years, and we moved here, to Colorado, a place with mountains and wide-open skies. A place where we knew no one. A place where we could try to breathe again. My husband, my George, he saved my life. He saved my sanity. He saw the monster I couldn't, and he did what a father, what a husband, is supposed to do. He protected his family. He absorbed the terrible knowledge and he took action, shielding me from the confrontation, from the fallout. He carried the burden of that final terrible meeting with our son so that I wouldn't have to. His love for me, in that darkest of hours, was a fierce, practical, and absolute thing. The lesson I learned is a brutal one I would not wish on my worst enemy. I learned that evil is not always a stranger. Sometimes, it is born in your own home. It eats at your own table. It has a familiar face. I learned that denial is a powerful sedative, but the truth, however agonizing, is the only antidote. And I learned that the quietest love can be the strongest shield. My advice to you, to anyone listening who feels that something is deeply wrong in their life, but they can't name it, who feels that they are going crazy, is this. Trust your body. Trust your unease. It is trying to tell you something. And find one person, just one person in your life, who you know, in your bones, is your safe harbor. And tell them you are scared. Tell them you think you are losing your mind. Sometimes, you need someone else's clear eyes to see the monster that is standing right beside you. Thank you for listening to my story. It feels like I have just lanced a terrible wound that has been poisoning me for years. It hurts, but it is the first step towards healing. To speak the truth is to finally rob the secret of its power. If this story has resonated with you, I ask you to share it, not for my sake, but for the sake of anyone who might be living in a quiet hell, convinced they are the crazy one. Let them know they are not. And please, subscribe for more stories. Love, Grandma Helen. See you in the next story.